Please welcome Gary Wasserman.
New York's economy has never been a monoculture. In fact, the diversity and inventiveness of our local industrial, manufacturing, and commercial hubs has long been one of the city's strongest natural resources. Municipal Art Society is committed to nurturing these hubs of innovation, which we know are essential to making sure our existing businesses thrive and new businesses are able to find their way in. The moderator of our next panel pioneered the Brooklyn Navy Yard project and now leads Industry City, creating a national model for fostering innovation economy, jobs, and sustainability. Please welcome Andrew Kimball.
Okay, great to be here. We have a sensational panel and not a lot of time. But to my left is David Ehrenberg, who's knocking out of the park as my successor at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. To his left is Jared Kushner, Chief Executive Officer of Kushner Companies, who is taking a massive complex that hasn't been used for many, many decades in Dumbo and converting it into an innovation hub. And Tucker Reed, who for the last 10 years or so has helped to reposition downtown Brooklyn as a hub of innovation. I'm going to ask a lot of questions very quickly, but first an observation. I would say that some of the most exciting economic development in the city now is happening along an innovation corridor, and it runs from Long Island City down to Sunset Park, includes projects like the Domino Sugar redevelopment, includes the massive Brooklyn Navy Yard, includes Dumbo Heights, includes the repositioning of downtown Brooklyn, and includes Industry City and Sunset Park, where I am. And in large measure, it involves taking big old buildings that once were the hub of 1950s manufacturing, but had really lain fallow for decades, and repurposing them for the innovation economy, a new definition of innovation and making that has a parallel in the 1950s in that it is once again driving the city's economy and creating the kinds of jobs that move people up the economic ladder. So what does it take to create one of these ecosystems? I'm going to start with Jared because he's really doing it out of whole cloth at Dumbo Heights. Tell us about the mixture of uses and what creates the ecosystem that attracts the tenants you're bringing there.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ed. That project he's talking about is a project we're doing in Dumbo Heights, which is right in downtown Brooklyn, but closer to Dumbo. What I would say is we're trying to do a lot of redevelopment there. We bought the properties from the Jehovah's Witnesses, who were a pleasure to deal with, and they used to print their Bibles in these buildings. So they're old manufacturing buildings. It's a complex of 6 buildings. And what I would say is that we're taking things to the next level. These buildings had not been very active in the community for a lot of years, but we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing if it wasn't in an area that had a lot of culture, a lot of energy in surroundings. So what we looked at was there was great transportation in the subways, and then there was a lot of great creative companies who were working out of Dumbo already. You know, Vinegar Hill was happening, Brooklyn Heights was happening, downtown Brooklyn was starting, and the Navy Yards, obviously, and this really was the center of the donuts. So the way we approach is we're very focused on placemaking, and we know that a lot of these companies are looking for very certain things, whether it's outdoor space, great high-speed internet with multiple options of carriers, reliability, good building infrastructure, but an aesthetic that's kind of modern industrial. So we focused on that, but the biggest difference that we made is all of our tenants, we wouldn't let them have cafeterias, and we said that we actually took much discounted rents on our retail because we really were able to curate and select who was going to be there. So we've got great yoga, great boxing place, we got a juice place, we got a teriyaki place, we got a salad place, we got a taco place. I mean, we've got all the different things that these tenants really want to make it an environment. You got the beer hall, you got all the places. So what we focused on was that the people who are working at these companies, they're there 10, 15 hours a day, and they want to feel great about the place that they work. And for a lot of these companies too, when they're competing for the same talent, the environment in which the people are in is very important. So for us, it wasn't just about making the space beautiful, which obviously you always want to do, and it helps you achieve the rents and get the better tenants. But it was also very important to kind of make place and make an environment. So we couldn't do it just anywhere, but there was a lot of momentum happening in Brooklyn, and we, I think, took what was there and we saw what was happening, but I think we saw what Brooklyn had the potential to be and not really what it was. And I think that this project will really help elevate. And it's been very validated so far. I mean, we've leased, we're finishing construction this month, so the complex will open up, but we have Etsy, WeWork, Alexis Batar, Frog Design moved over from Manhattan, and we've got a lot more exciting companies that are coming. And I really do think that this will become almost like a Rockefeller Center nexus of Brooklyn for many, many years to come.
So, David, you're doing some amazing work around the perimeter of the yard, Admiral's Row, Building 77, really, in some ways, bringing down the wall, even though the wall remains. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about building on the ecosystem that was already at the Navy Yard and connecting it to the outside communities.
Right. So I grew up in Brooklyn and had no idea of the history of the Navy Yard or what was happening in the present day and the extraordinary innovations that are going on at the Navy Yard. I mean, we have robotics companies with robots on every Mars rover since 2003. We have a woman designing levitating tables, on and on and on. And that's hidden away from view. The wall is important to us because we have a lot of very active manufacturing and industrial companies that need to be offset from other uses to some extent, although probably not as much as historically manufacturing districts needed to be. But we are trying to invite the community into the yard in order to highlight the innovation and the jobs that are being created in the yard, and also to become as good neighbors as we possibly can. The way we're doing that is through a kind of combination of industrial manufacturing spaces that are open to the public, along with amenities that, as Jared said, any tenant requires. We are focused on slightly different tenants than Jared, but certainly all of our tenants are looking for great places to hang out, great places to eat, places to have informal meetings, to meet clients and the like. And we're trying to create a version of that that's remains true to the industrial nature of the yard.
So I think if you looked at the tenant base that Jared's developing, that you have at the Navy Yard, that we have at Industry City, and you drew a circle around those subsectors in the economy, you would find they are the fastest growing sectors in New York City over the last 7 years, from art to technology to design to light manufacturing. So Tucker, you've had a big challenge of taking some not quite so old buildings, but buildings that needed to be made cool and needed to create a community around them. Talk a little bit about what's happening in downtown Brooklyn and how you're attracting that same kind of tenant base.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, the most interesting thing is that we're at a moment right now where for the first time in a couple generations, right, companies want to be in Brooklyn, not because of the economics that are driving their choice, that it's necessarily cheaper rent in Manhattan, but because they want to be there to be in Brooklyn. And it's been a long time since we've kind of lived in a time where companies are making choices like that. And at first, that kind of built off of interesting former industrial buildings that could be repositioned, the charm of places like Dumbo with cobblestone streets and the waterfront, and very smart, public investment in infrastructure and land use that kind of laid the groundwork for that. But increasingly now, Jared's buildings are now taken and going to be full soon. And the great work that Andrew's doing down in Industry City, from an absorption standpoint soon, there probably may not be much real estate there. So that low-hanging fruit of those former industrial buildings to be repositioned is going to be churned through rather quickly. And then it's going to be really interesting to see, well, what happens next? Who's going to kind of double down on this whole growth movement, start building ground-up new construction to support commercial? We're starting to see inklings of that in Williamsburg. Downtown is an obvious place for that, given the density that's there and the zoning that allows for it. And I think, when you and I started on our Tech Triangle effort a couple years ago, we heard from a lot of companies, I would never move to Metro Tech, I would never move to downtown Brooklyn. That's where my father worked, in those 80s-based kind of office buildings. And over the past 3 years, we've seen that to be completely untrue, right? MakerBot came and set up their headquarters there. A company called Tough Mudder, which runs kind of athletic events for the extreme, took their office from Dumbo and moved it into downtown Brooklyn. And they took these floors of Metro Tech and took out the drop ceilings and totally repositioned them the way they'd like them, so that when you get off of the elevator, you could be anywhere. You could be in Industry City. You could be in another. So this kind of myth of that really wasn't accessible for me, or I only can go in this industrial type repositioned building, right? That's all going to kind of change necessarily in the next couple of years. And it's going to be really interesting to see, given the timing that we're in, of this great demand to be in Brooklyn, what does that next generation of office space look like? How are people going to get there? How are people taking advantages of the great building blocks that we have in the colleges and universities and the intellectual capital that are there to drive that?
So let's go on the education and jobs for a second. So you look at innovation hubs around the country. almost uniformly there's an education component that makes it a success. So David, you're doing some great work with academic collaboration. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that creates a pipeline of workforce going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's something that we're extraordinarily focused on, both as a service to our tenants and to create the kind of environment and ecosystem that will generate the next generation of companies at the Yard, but also as a way to provide access to those next generation jobs to the local community. We have an active manufacturing set within the Navy Yard, but that manufacturing is very different. You talked about the concentric circles around industries. Those circles would overlap very dramatically. A lot of our manufacturers, it's very hard to distinguish them from technology or design companies. In order to run the modern manufacturing equipment, you need computer skills. These are not, your classic, dirty, gritty manufacturing pieces of equipment. And so we are looking at academic uses from graduate schools all the way down to the high school level to bring them to the Yard, have them interface directly with the entrepreneurs who can inform the academic program being set, and then also kind of push those students as close to that academic activity as possible. We cut the ribbon just 2 weeks ago on Brooklyn College's graduate film program at Steiner Studios. That's the first graduate film program on an active backlog in the country and is a CUNY program. And those students, better have a great elevator pitch because they will literally be on the elevator with the top talent of their industry. And for us and for the ecosystem, that kind of combination of bringing the talent and bringing the local community is really, an extraordinary.
So Tucker, when we were doing the Tech Triangle, we sort of found this misalignment between what the local schools were teaching and what was happening in the innovation economy. Can you talk about that misalignment and kind of what you've been doing to help bridge it?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. The feedback loop between industry and academia didn't exist. So people were teaching courses for technology-based design or coding or for platforms that were out of date 5 years ago. So we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years is really making the academic community aware of the opportunity here, the growth of these industries, and how many of these industries, like I said, they want to be in Brooklyn, so they are a bit civically minded. They're very interested in engaging with the local community around them. So much so that the colleges and universities in downtown Brooklyn that collectively have 60,000 kids that come to school here every year. If you think about that as a potential labor force, it's very powerful, right? And not found in a lot of other places. The universities finally got together this fall and organized themselves into a formal consortium that you find in many other places throughout the country, but we launched the Brooklyn Education Innovation Network. And the main role of that new organization is just to provide that real-time feedback loop, to get C-level executives into adjunct professor roles at these companies, to provide mentorship, internship, job opportunities. And we also kind of collectively looked at the impact of those universities on the local economy. They collectively have a $3 billion impact every year on the Brooklyn's economy. And those connections weren't being made before, so just think about the potential for when those connections really start to grow.
And can I just interject? I mean, this may be a very extraordinarily obvious point, but the importance of that feedback loop is accelerating so dramatically as the pace of technology change.
Totally.
5 years, 20 years ago, being 5 years behind a tech curve might not have been that big a deal. Now that's 2 generations of programming and iterations on the program. So it's becoming so much more important.
And that's an academic feedback loop, but also to David's point, I mean, Jared's campus sits right next to City Tech's campus.
Right.
City Tech kids are going to go enjoy the tacos and the beers and the bike share concierge that you'll have there, right? Talk about there'll be that ecosystem that we really envisioned.
So
you can really start to see it coming together now.
You have done an amazing thing, I think, there in attracting some tech companies directly from the West Coast. Like when young people move to New York City, the old assumption had been they go to Manhattan first and then maybe they move to Brooklyn and Queens or Montclair. Now they're coming directly to Brooklyn and Queens. Are you really finding that tech companies that are coming to New York are actually coming directly to Brooklyn first as opposed to making the stop in Manhattan?
So what I would say is that nobody's bagged a big San Francisco company yet and brought them to Brooklyn. I think that what's interesting is some of the people who will come out. We've done a lot of tours and we've spoken to a lot of companies. They'll say, okay, well, would you have an office in New York? Yeah, we have 10,000 feet. What are you looking for? We're looking for 300,000 feet in Brooklyn. And it's just so it's pretty dramatic the moves that some of these companies are looking to make potentially, but. What I would say is that I think a lot of people look at, I joke that you used to live in Brooklyn because you couldn't afford Manhattan and you didn't want to live with your parents. Today, people are paying a premium to Brooklyn. I have people moving to my apartments on the Upper East Side because they can't afford Brooklyn. And so what you have there is I think that the placemaking is very important. I think that Brooklyn is an amazing ecosystem of creativity. I think people love living there, and I think that a lot of these CEOs who are now making decisions, they're looking at not just the employees they have, but they're looking at the employees they want. And I think that as they look at a lot of the employees that they really value in their companies, more and more, a lot of them are living in Brooklyn. And so what we find in our campus, and I really hope this was the dream and the inspiration, is that you do create this ecosystem where people are interacting with each other. Somebody who's in jewelry design with somebody who designs websites, with somebody who's an engineer, with somebody who does manufacturing. And the ideas come together, and it allows people the chance to expand their minds and not think very myopically. I mean, one of the problems of having a place, whether you're in Midtown and hopefully you're just with finance people, if you're in Silicon Valley, you're just with tech people. I think the blending of industries, and one of the greatest things about New York, and why I think it's a big advantage for companies to be here, and why we've seen more and more tech companies making big bets on New York, is because you just have such a diversity of talent and experience that it really fosters a lot of creativity. So I think that now you really see a great phase in Brooklyn, where between Navy Yards, Industry City, downtown, what we're doing in Dumbo, you have a lot of these places really emerging that are going to become maybe the foundation for that next generation, where now these companies are looking and saying they can be in Brooklyn. And so I think within the next maybe 12 to 18 months, we will see kind of a big San Francisco company say, wait, I'm coming to New York, I want the best, most creative talent. I think a lot of those people are in Brooklyn. I think that's what my identity should be. I mean, you look at Vice Media, you look at Etsy, you have a lot of great companies that are really cultivated, and Brooklyn's very strongly in their DNA.
So in our last minute, I want to touch on government and transportation and what they can do to help drive what's already happening organically. So to me, again, the challenge is build on what's happening from Long Island City to Sunset Park, that north-south transportation loop. We've heard a lot about ferries. Dave is working hard on that. I'm working hard on that. We've heard about bus rapid transit. City Council just announced they're going to study light rail. Tucker, what else can you do as a business advocacy group to move this, and what should the city be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, the two constraints to growth to realize this vision that we're talking about are going to be around having enough available space, so some smart land use policy, but the market will drive a lot of that. I think the city is looking at targeted places like an Industry City, like in other areas along that corridor, maybe making some land use changes, but moving people along that corridor, right? We have a infrastructure network that is very Manhattan-centric. It makes sense. It was built centuries ago when everyone wanted to get into the city. Now, if I'm working in Sunset Park and I'm living in Williamsburg, how am I going to get to work, right? Or if I work in downtown Brooklyn and I've got a great place in Astoria, I got to go into the Manhattan and come back out, and it's totally inefficient. Much of my day is wasted in that respect. Mm-hmm. So figuring out some sort of 21st century transportation infrastructure to link this creative corridor. I mean, I saw Vishant Chakrabarty here earlier. He often talks eloquently about how, in the 20th century, Broadway was the real driver of growth. And in the 21st century, the East River is that real driver of growth, right? And so we as a city, ferry helps, bike share helps, but we need to come up with a people mover that is worthy of the type of growth and innovation that we're seeing here.
Good. David, last word?
And I would say that the Navy Yard is already there. We have 7,000 people working at the yard every day based on just the projects we have announced and that are either in design stage or in the ground. We will be at nearly 20,000 people working every day at the yard. And we can't wait for those massive public investments in a transportation system. So we're having to take matters into our own hands. We're going to be launching a massive new bus system to move people to and from the train stations just to the Navy Yard, hopefully as a stopgap to the longer term investments that are really required, because if we don't do that stopgap measure, we're going to be leaving thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs on the table, which is something that we just can't allow it happen.
Good. Well, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.